In the dark shadows and in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast, we are the brave and bold. The origin of the democratic ideal, by mainly P. Hall. It's in a book called The Secret Destiny of America. World democracy was the secret dream of the great classical philosophers thousands of years before Columbus. They were aware of the existence of our Western Hemisphere and selected it to be the site of their philosophic empire. The brilliant plan of the ancients had survived in our time, and it will continue to function until the great work is accomplished. The American nation desperately needs a vision of its own purpose.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Thank you, baby. Hey, hey everybody, greetings and welcome to the American Sermon. I'm your host, John Towers, and the American Sermon is it's like a limited series spin-off of my regular podcast that's just called the Abracast. We talk about the occult, history, conspiracy, and like the lady said, violence. So, you can find the Abracast anywhere that the best podcasts can be found. So, I just wanted to take a minute and, just kind of do like an introduction episode so I can get something out there to get my RSS feed and everything and get it submitted to where I needed to get it to. And I guess this journey kind of started, I think, like a year and a half ago. I did an episode. It was 2 episodes on The Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall. And it really started my gears turning. And this limited series podcast is the fruits of the labors of all those turning gears. So I thought, for this introduction episode, that I would go back and talk about some of these, some of the secret destiny of America. Talk about, I think we're going to do the first 3 kind of we're going to talk about the first 3 kind of chapters in that. This is a way, so you guys get to know me a little bit, and I can kind of put out there what we're going to be doing. This limited series is going to be dealing with the occult, the offbeat, and weird stuff. It's sometimes sinister. We're going to find out that's mixed in to the foundation of the United States. And Manly P. Hall was a Mason. He was a Freemason. We're going to talk a lot about Freemasonry, especially early on here. But he was a Freemason, and he wrote. He was the founder of the what the fuck was it called? The Philosophical Research Society. So he was born in Canada, but he created this Philosophical Research Society in LA, and he wrote this book right as the World War II was ending. And so, especially here in the first chapter, it's called The Origin of the Democratic Ideal. He talks a lot about about America. God, I'm so sorry. What the I don't know who comes down here and fucks with this stuff while I'm not here. He talks a lot about America's place going forward in the world after the war. So it's interesting to look back and talk about it. He also talks an awful lot about democracy, and I think he's talking about capital D democracy. You know, every man gets a vote kind of stuff. You know, eventually we're going to wind up talking about what. Here go the first set of people that are going to light the fucking selves on fire when I say something. But we're going to talk a little bit, probably later, later on in the series, about why that's a bad idea and why we, you know, the two houses, the Congress and the Senate, have different election cycles, and why there's an electoral college is all it's all about fixing these problems with democracy. So I'm going to go ahead and just get into it here. I feel like I've babbled already too much. So I need to get lubed up here. America cannot refuse the challenge of leadership in the post-war world. Mere physical reconstruction of ravaged countries and reorganization of political, economic, and social systems is the lesser task we will face. The larger problem and the great challenge is how to set up a new order of world ethics firmly established on a foundation of democratic idealism. Experts in various fields have already submitted programs designed to meet the needs of those nations whose way of life has been disrupted by war. But with the failing common to specifically trained minds, these planners incline to think mostly in the terms of their own particular interest. As yet, no one has touched the fundamentals of international ethics. No one has advanced a working plan securely based on a broad, deep, and sympathetic understanding of the human being and his problems. The thinking has been in dual fields of power politics and material economics, with remedies expressed in terms of charts and blueprints and patterns and industrial programs. But there is one new and encouraging element present in most of these recommendations of today's experts. They are recognizing the necessity of conceiving the world as an interdepartment structure. Yet, even as they recognize the need for a unity of human interests, their recommendations are for the perpetuation of highly competitive economic policies, which, if they were consistently applied, must lead in the end to war and discord. It is not an easy task to unite the efforts of the human race towards the accomplishment of any common good. Mankind in the majority is selfish, provincial in attitude, and concerned primarily with personal success and acquiring creature comforts. It will not be possible to build an enduring peace until the average man has been convinced that personal selfishness is detrimental to personal happiness and personal success. It must be shown that self-seeking has gone out of fashion. Oh boy. And that the world is moving on to a larger conception of living. The post-war planners have more of idealism in their programs than has ever before been expressed in the problem of the relationship of nations. But it's still not enough. A clear and complete statement of world purpose is required, a world dream great enough to inspire unity in the world effort. These are the days of Americans' opportunity to lead a still troubled mankind towards a better way of life. If we meet this challenge, we will ensure not only the survival of our nation for centuries to come, but we shall gain an enduring gratitude of our fellow men and Americans, and will be remembered to the end of time as a great enlightened people. It is not enough that we solve particular problems. We must solve the very cause of problem itself. Wars, depressions, crime, dictators and their oppressions are the symptoms giving clear indication of a greater ailment. To examine each problem solely in terms of the problem itself, without recognition of its true relationship to a larger and more universal necessity, is to fail in the broader implications of an enduring peace and prosperity. Experience should have taught us long ago that policies which have originated from material considerations and attitudes have proved inadequate. The whole story of civilization and the records of history tell us that all such adjustments hold no hope of lasting peace or security. But here we are again preparing ourselves to be satisfied with temporary solutions for permanent problems. He could have wrote this yesterday, right? The recognition is long overdue that we oversimplify the problem of world peace when we think that process is one of breaking the task down for examination of its materialistic parts and then hopefully devising an applicable remedy for each of these. The physical conditions of the human existence are not the whole of the human problem. The human problem. We could adjust all material considerations to the point of supremist equity and yet accomplish virtually nothing solutional. The greatest of known problems is the human problem, and it is not at all embracing. Examination is made into every phase of the human need. Can be adequate reconstruction policy for post-war world. That man is physical is obvious, but that he is also mental and emotional. He is spiritual, and he has a soul. These later factors are not so obvious. But what to do about them is not so easy, for they are difficult to understand and even more difficult to classify and reduce into a working pattern. We, as builders of a civilization, will have to learn that only when equal consideration is given to each of these elements of man's nature, we will arrive at the solution for the disasters into which men and nations precipitate themselves. Our post-war reconstructors, ours, if not by our selection, at least with our consent, are not outstandingly qualified for this broader task. Few indeed are the statesmen and politicians who have any conception of man as a spiritual being, and for military leaders they are primarily disciplinarians, valuable and as such in times of war, but not at all emotionally geared towards problems of individualistic peacetime character. And world planners recruited from among industrial leaders, it must be admitted, are not generally informed on the workings of the human psyche. Those who have made study of human conduct their life work, the sociologists have little scientific knowledge of the hidden springs that animate and that very conduct into its amazing diversity of manifestations. if a word is to be said for bringing in the clergy, it might be that the theologian planner who will be truly useful will be one who acquires at least some knowledge of the science of biology. We are displaying a woeful lack of vision in the way we fumble with eternal laws of life. It is not enough that we now hopefully create a setup permitting men to give allegiance with their minds or to serve faithfully with their bodies. We must someday face the truth that man is inevitable and incurably an idealist. For this is the truth that will set us free. Man's need is for the idealistic content of his nature to be properly nourished, and then his whole consciousness will impel him to right action. And then no more will our laws fail, treaties be broken, and the rights of men stand violated. The American nation desperately needs a vision of its own purpose. It cannot conceive it in a generous idealism, great and strong enough to bind thoughtless and selfish persons to something bigger than themselves. It must recognize that in the intangible ideals and the foundations are laid for all seeable good. Must know that the truly practical course and the course of hard realism for America is one that is laid basically in a generous idealism. This is more than an indicated course. It is one that we will inevitably must follow, guided by the hand of destiny. Believing this to be so, I dedicate this book in this proposition that American democracy is a part of a universal plan. Our world is ruled by inflexible laws which control not only the motions of the heavenly bodies, but the consequences of human conduct. These universal motions, interpreted politically, are impelling human society out of a state of autocracy and tyranny to democracy and freedom. This motion is inevitable for the growth of humans, is a gradual development of mind over matter, and the motion itself represents the natural and reasonable unfoldment of the potentials within human character. Those who attempt to resist this motion destroy themselves. To cooperate with this motion and to assist nature in every possible way to the accomplishment of its inevitable purpose is to survive. Thousands of years before the beginning of the Christian era, many enlightened thinkers discovered the will of God as expressed through nature in the affairs of men. They made known their discoveries in terms of religion, philosophies, science, arts, the political systems. These first statements are now the admitted monuments of ancient learning available to men today. They are generally ignored. Years of research among the records of olden peoples available in the libraries, museums, and shrines of ancient culture has convinced me that there exists in the world today and has existed for thousands of years a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those who are intellectually and spiritually, whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many. The great masses of people still live along without any knowledge whatsoever that they are part of the universal motion in time and space. Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Buddha, Jesus, and Mohammed are among the greatest names recorded in history. But it is not customary to regard the men who bore these names as statesmen or sociologists. They are thought of as philosophers, sages, seers, and mystics, whose doctrines have no application to the political needs of an industrial civilization. Yet, it is men like Plato and Buddha who still exercise the most powerful force in mortal affairs towards the perpetuation and preservation of a civilized state among all nations. All of the great leaders of ancient times realized and taught that the establishment of state of permanent peace among the nations depended upon the release of human ideals, but through properly trained and disciplined minds capable of interpreting these ideals in terms of the common good. World democracy was the secret dream of the great classical philosophers towards the accomplishment of this greatest of all human ends. They outlined programs of education, religion, and social conduct directed to the ultimate achievement of a practical and universal brotherhood. And in order to accomplish their purposes more effectively, these ancient scholars bound themselves with certain mystic ties into a broad conformity. In Egypt, Greece, India, and China, the state mysteries came into existence. Orders of initiated priest philosophers were formed as a sovereign body to instruct, advise, and direct the rulers of the states. Thousands of years ago in Egypt, these mystical orders were aware of the existence of the Western Hemisphere. But in the great continent, which we call America, the bold resolution was made that this Western continent should become the site of the philosophic empire. Just when this was done, it is impossible now to say, but certainly the decision was reached prior to the time of Plato for a thinly veiled statement of this resolution is the substance of the treaties on the Atlantic islands. One of the most ancient of man's constructive ideals is the dream of a universal democracy and a cooperation of all nations in a commonwealth of states. The mechanism for the establishment of this ideal was set in motion in the ancient temples of Greece, Egypt, and India. So brilliant was the plan, and so well was it administrated, that it has survived to our time, and it will continue to function until the great work is accomplished. Philosophy set up its house in the world to free men by freeing them of their own inordinate desires and ambitions. It saw selfishness as the greatest crime against common good, for selfishness is natural to all who are untutored. It recognized that the mind has to be trained in the laws of thinking before men can be capable of rulership. And it knew the democratic commonwealth can be a reality only when our world is a world of self-ruling men. And so it is from the remote past, from the deep shadows of the medieval world, as well as from the early struggles of a more modern time, that the power of American democracy has come. But we are only on the threshold of the democratic state. Not only must we preserve that which we have gained through ages of striving, we must also perfect the plan of the ages setting up here the machinery for a world brotherhood of nations and races. This is our duty and our glorious opportunity. It seems to me that the basic plan for the post-war world should be one solidly founded in this great dream of universal brotherhood. It is not enough to work on the problem solely in terms of politics and industry. The formula must express a broad idealism, one which appeals to the finest intuitions of man and the universally understandable by all who have lived, dreamed, and suffered on this mortal sphere. So Hall has some ideas here we're going to unpack just for a quick second. The first is this idea of this like underground society of super philosophers. This whole book is riddled with this stuff. It's like the idea of the hidden men throughout history, secretly steering the events of history, like to create the nation. He's got this one story in particular that I fucking love. It is this story of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and he's saying that people were crowding for blocks around. They were crowding around the building where they were doing their debates and stuff, and they were all trying to like listen to what's going on and stuff. And there was one part where they were questioning stuff, and they were like really at like some kind of like loggerhead on a specific points of the document or something, and all of a sudden this unseen American somewhere outside the building just starts giving this speech. So I'm just going to find it. Hold on. But so while I'm looking for it, I'll just continue. So there's this idea that Francis Bacon or whatever had this like secret college of philosophers and stuff, of these guys who would like steer these events through history. And he also has this thing about secret societies. Secret societies have this repository of this secret of the democratic ideal, like tied into them. And this, I mean, it's interesting because, like I said, we're going to get into Freemasonry here at the beginning, and some of the stuff that I was able to find just on, like, they call it the legend of the temple or the secret origins of Freemasonry. I found two that are pretty shocking. I think that they're pretty shocking. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to just read this in part. This is chapter 17, the unknown who swayed the signers of the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to do this and then we're going to get back on track. Let's see. On July 4th, 1776, at the old State House in Philadelphia, a group of patriotic men were gathered for the solemn purpose of proclaiming the liberty of the American colonies. From the letters of Thomas Jefferson, which are preserved in the Library of Congress, I've been able to gather considerable data concerning this portentous occasion. In reconstructing the scene, it is well to remember that if the Revolutionary War failed, every man who had signed the parchment then laying on the table would be subject to the penalty of death for high treason. This is why the founders said that they pledged their lives, their treasure, and their sacred honor for the revolution. It should be also remembered that the delegates representing the various colonies were not entirely of one mind as the policies which would dominate the new nation. They were crazily not of one mind. There were several speeches in the balcony. Patriotic citizens crowded all available space and listened attentively to the proceedings. Jefferson expressed himself with great vigor, and John Adams of Boston spoke with great strength. And the Philadelphia printer, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, quiet and calm as usual, spoke his mind with well-chosen words. The delegates hovered between sympathy and uncertainty as the long hours of the summer day crept by. For life is sweet when there is danger of losing it. The lower doors were locked and a guard was posted to prevent interruption. According to Jefferson, it was late in the afternoon before the delegates gathered their courage to the sticking point. The talk was about axes and scaffolds and the gibbet, when suddenly a strong, bold voice sounded. "Gibbet, they may stretch our necks on all of the gibbets in the land, and they may turn every rock into a scaffold, and every tree to a gallows, every home into a grave, and yet the words on that parchment can never die. They may pour our blood on 1,000 scaffolds, and yet from every drop that dies the axe, a new champion of freedom will spring into birth. The British king may blot out the stars of God from the sky, but he cannot blot out his words written on that parchment there. The works of God may perish, his words never. The words of this declaration will live in the world long after our bones are dust. To the mechanic in his workshop they will speak hope. To the slave in the mines, freedom. But to the coward kings, these words will speak in tones of warning that they cannot choose but hear. Sign that parchment. Sign if the next moment of the gibbet's rope is about your neck. Sign it the next minute. This hall rings with the clash of falling axes. Signed by all your hopes in life or death, as men, as husbands, as fathers, brothers. Sign your names to the parchment or be accursed forever. Sign, and not only for yourselves, but for all ages, for that parchment will be the textbook of freedom, the Bible of the rights of men forever. Nay, do not start and whisper with surprise. It is truth. On your own hearts witness it. God proclaims it. Look at this strange band of exiles and outcasts suddenly transformed into a people, a handful of men weak in arms but mighty in God-like faith. Nay, look at your recent achievements, your Bunker Hill, your Lexington, and then tell me if you can, God has not given America to be free. It is not given to our poor human intellect to climb to the skies and go pierce the counsel of the Almighty One, but methinks I stand among awful clouds which veil the brightness of Jehovah's throne. Methinks I see that recording angel come trembling up to that throne and speak his dread message. Father, the old world is baptized in blood. Father, look with one glance of thine eternal eye, and behold evermore that terrible sight. Men trodden beneath the oppressor's feet, nations lost in blood, murder, and superstition, walking hand in hand over the graves of victims, and not a single voice of hope to man. He stands there, the angel trembling with the record of human guilt, but hark, the voice of God speaks from out of the awful cloud. Let there be light again. Tell my people, the poor and the oppressed, to go out from the old world, from oppression and blood, and build my altar in the new. And as I live, my friends, I believe that to be his voice. Yes, were my soul trembling on the verge of eternity, where this hand freezing in death, where this voice choking in the last struggle, I would still, with the last impulse of that soul, with the last wave of the hand, and with the last gasp of that voice, implore you to remember this truth. God has given America to be free. Yes, I sank to the gloomy shadows of the grave. With my last faint whisper, I would beg you to sign that parchment for the sake of those millions whose every breath is now hushed in intense expectations as they look up to you for the awful words. You are free. The unknown speaker fell exhausted into his seat, and the delegates, carried away by his enthusiasm, rushed forward. John Hancock scarcely had time to pen his bold signature before the quill was grasped by another. It was done. The delegates turned to express their gratitude to the unknown speaker for his eloquent words. But he was not there. It was a strange man who seemed to speak with divine authority, whose solemn words gave courage to the doubters and sealed the destiny of a new nation. Unfortunately, nobody knows. All right, we're going to do one more. The world's first Democrat. This is chapter 2 of the... Sorry for getting in a whole thing. I just spun out of control. Man has passed out of the state of savagery and become a civilized creature with the development of social consciousness. Civilization is the collective state in our collective types of life. The isolationist is a detriment to himself and a menace to others. There is a great difference between isolationism and intellectualism. Development of the mind releases the individual from mob psychology, but does not set him apart from the common responsibilities of his kind. A true thinker becomes a force of good within the group life if his intellectual powers lure him away from the practical problems and values of his world. He can no longer make his contribution to the social unity. Political reforms are not accomplished by the people, but through the people. Behind all collective progress stands the enlightened individual's leadership. His first superiority does not free him from common responsibility. His is the obligation to assume the greater burden of directing his visions to the well-being of all people. Let us see how this works, and we'll go far back to ancient times. Akhenaten, Pharaoh of Egypt, throned under the title Amenhotep IV, is often referred to as the first civilized human being. While this may not be literally true, it was definitely the first man in recorded history to exemplify social consciousness in the administration of a great nation. Akhenaten, the beloved child of Aton, was born at Thebes. about 1388 BC. Like most of the princes of his house, he was extremely delicate as a child. Well, duh. Haven't you watched the History Channel? It's because he was half alien. And it was feared that he would not live to reach the throne, and he was the last of his line. The dynasty would end with him if he died without issue. For this reason, he was married in his 12th year to his 10-year-old Egyptian girl of noble birth named Nefertiti. During the childhood of the young king, the queen mother, T, ruled as regent of the double empire. She is believed to have been of Syrian origin, which would count for the many strange and un-Egyptian ideas in religion, government, and art which were developed during the reign of Akhenaten. Queen T, brilliant and capable, had recognized before her son reached his majority that in him were qualities more divine than human. The son became the actual ruler of the country in his 18th year. And his reign extended for 17 years. And Akhenaten, who had been ruler of Egypt only about 2 years when he opposed his will to the priesthood of Amun-Ra by attacking the oldest and most firmly established of all Egyptian institutions. The young pharaoh created legions of enemies and brought down upon himself the wrath of religion of the state. He could scarcely have chosen a surer way of complicating the problems in his life. In the midst of the conflict, he proclaimed a new spiritual dispensation, and to escape his enemies, built a new capital city 160 miles up the Nile from Cairo. His new faith was Atonism, and he named his city Kut en Atun, the horizon of the Atun. And he dedicated the city with these words: "Ye behold the city of the horizon of Atun, which the Atun has desired me to make for him as a monument of the great name of my majesty forever. For it is Atun, my father, that brought me to this city of horizon." As the high priest of the new religion, Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten because of the older name included the word Amen, whose faith he had rejected. Charles F. Potter, in the History of Religion, says of Akhenaten that he was the first pacifist, the first realist, and the first monotheist, the first democrat, small d, and the first heretic. The first humanitarian, the first internationalist. It gets worse as it goes along. And the first person to attempt to found a religion. He was born out of due time, several thousand years too soon. From his 26th year to his 31st year, Akhenaten devoted his life to the perfection of his mystical doctrine in the city which he had built for the ever-living God, where he taught the mystery of the Divine Father and wrote the simple and beautiful poems which have endured and survived time. To Akhenaten, God was not a mighty warrior ruling over Egypt, speaking through the oracles of priests. He was not a supreme being flying through the air in a war chariot leading armies of destruction. Atun was the gentle father who loved all his children of every race and nation, and he desired for them that they should live together in peace and comradeship. Even more, God, the Atun, had created all the lesser creatures, whether birds that nested in the papyrus reeds along the banks of the Nile, or dragonflies with the many-colored wings that hover over quiet pools and the lotus blooms. The Atun was the father of all beasts and fishes and flowers and insects, and he had fashioned them in his wisdom and preserved them with his love and tenderness. Akhenaten, seated in the garden of his palace, spent many hours watching the flights of the birds and listening to the voices of these little creatures. And he tells us that he found in the Atun all of them, and that his heart went out to them, and that he gave thanks for the goodness of everything that had lived. This was a pharaoh who traveled alone through the countryside, meeting the peasants and conversing with the slaves and sharing the simple food of the poor and the most ignorant men. He listened with profound respect, for in each of his subjects he sought and found the life of Atun. And he saw the universal God shining through the eyes of little children, beheld the beauty of the Atun in the bodies of the men who worked in the fields. And he could not understand why others did not see God in everything as he did. Like most of the great religious leaders, Akhenaten accepted the social problem of life as part of religion. He cannot accept the inequities of birth, wealth, the physical estate as a jurisdiction for men prosecuting each other or exploiting one another. Exploring one another is a whole different topic. He saw every living thing having a divine right, a right to live well, to think, to dream, and to hope, and to aspire. He saw it the duty of the ruler to protect this beauty in the hearts of his people, to nourish it, and to give every possible opportunity for its expression and perfection. Religious intolerance was improbable among those who worshipped the Atun. There was no room for political intolerance in a world governed by the laws of brotherly love. Each man became the protector and comforter of all other men, cherishing the dreams and others equally with his own. In his personal life, Akhenaten emerged as the first man in history to bring dignity and a gentle beauty to the management of his home. He was the father of 7 daughters, to whom he was completely devoted, and in his speeches and public pronouncements, he always referred to Queen Nefertiti as his beloved wife. It was usually for the pharaohs to cause themselves to be depicted in great stone carvings upon the walls of their palaces. They were represented with majestic figures, crowned and sceptered, and they were shown either seated on their thrones or wielding their weapons against their foes. Akhenaten was the only pharaoh in the history of Egypt who chose to be depicted with his arm around his wife and his little daughters playing and seated on his lap. As with the passing years of the health of the pharaoh grew worse and the opposition of the priesthood of Amun-Ra grew greater, and his reign was complicated by the invasions of the Hittite nations. The governors of various provinces pleaded with him for help, but Akhenaten would not send armies. This dreamer king saw his lands pillaged and his cities conquered, but he would not kill his enemies. They, too, were children of Atun. Akhenaten died on his 36th year at the altar of Atun in the temple of the faith that he had created, but his mummy case was found. The following prayer to the Atun was discovered inscribed in golden foil beneath his feet. I breathe the sweet breath which comes forth from thy mouth, and I behold thy beauty every day, and give me thy hands holding thy spirit, that I may receive it and may be lifted by it. I call thou upon my name unto eternity, and I shall never fail. As the words of the great Egyptologist Professor Breasted, there died with him such a spirit as the world had never seen. Akhenaten was the first man in history who dared to dream of the brotherhood of men. and he cheerfully gave his life and his empire for that dream. He is indeed the beautiful child of the living Atun, whose name shall live forever and ever. Amen. I added the amen. He wouldn't have said amen if you were paying attention. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to this first pre-episode or whatever of the American Sermon. If you like the topics that we talked about today, you might want to head over to abracast.com and go to the featured topic links. You can find those 2 episodes on the whole book, The Secret Destiny of America, is up there. Probably in the occult section, probably also in the Freemasonry section. You can find them. But you go to abracast.com. You can check out some of my books. If you like this stuff, you would like the graphic novel, my latest graphic novel, The Ages. What else? You can sign in my mailing list. I send some free content every now and again out there. You can sign into it on the website. So really, I'm just super excited about getting this limited series rolling. Like I said, I've been thinking about it and planning it now for almost a year and a half, I guess. And I've really started working on it in earnest the last 2 months, I guess. So I'm super excited about it, and I hope that you guys stick with me. I hope that you like it, and I hope you check out the regular show. I'm John Towers, and I'm out. You go on the website, you can pick up a t-shirt if you want to. Check out all my books that are there, and the regular podcast is there. So check it out. Check it out, yo. We'll see you next week. Or whenever, next month. I don't know when this is going on. I don't know when you're going to find it. So I can't. We'll see in a little while. We'll see in a little bit. We'll see in a few fucking minutes.